Welcome to Insurance Technology Amplified, the podcast where we explore how innovation is transforming the insurance industry. This is the place where technology and expertise come together to empower agents, carriers, and the industry alike. Thank you for tuning in. Now, let's get to the show.
Howdy, Emma. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, I don't know if you've ever listened to any of our podcasts. If you did, I think you'd be the one who actually, you're the one person who listened to it. I love how we keep doing this week after week, and I really don't check the data, so for all I know, we have one listener or one downloader or thousands, but I end up learning a lot on these, so they're a good use of time. But the one thing I always forget to do is we jump right into it, and I forget to get into like an intro and who you are and what you do and what you're passionate about and your little space in the world in terms of the insurance industry. So I'd love to learn a little bit about that and love for you to kind of tell us and whoever's listening kind of a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Well, so I came into the insurance space, I would say, through the technology pipeline. So I initially started my career as a teacher, and I have a degree to teach 6th through 12th grade social studies. And as I was at kind of the precipice of deciding what school I was going to go work for, I listened to my gut when something told me that I should try a different career path and see about something different. And so I went into the corporate world in a corporate training position, recognized that I liked business, and then from there found my way into sales. And my first sales role and where I spent most of my time directly selling was working for a process automation company that had, we resold different technologies and redesigned processes for companies. And we worked cross-vertically all across the board. But one of my areas of specialty that I built over the time in that role was going into P&C insurance. And then from there, I moved deeper into the insurance industry and sold core systems for a short period of time, like directly to the carrier side of business. We could get into why I didn't love that, but there's some dynamics in the big software consulting and implementation space that I didn't love based off of my experience prior to that being able to be tech agnostic to a certain extent. And so throughout that time period, specifically after COVID hit, I started creating a lot of content online. And as I was creating that content online, got connected much deeper with all of the different assets of the insurance industry, started tapping into new connections on the agency and brokerage side. I would say probably the place I'm least experienced in is the MGA side of the world. But then again, working with carriers across the different facets of my career. And now I have a consulting company with my husband where we work kind of across the entire insurance life cycle, helping people really tap into how to make the most of digital tools to get in front of people and sell your product. So we work with agents and brokers. We do have some carrier executives that work with us, as well as a lot of insurtechs that are kind of in that pocket of trying to find the attention and excitement behind their products.
What's the name of your company?
Roloff Consulting, super creatively named by the two Roloffs that decided to start it.
So it's funny. It's the type of thing that it's actually a cool name. You could say, however, play on words with, we'll turn Roloff into like this launching off point.
There we go. See, I didn't even think of that.
No, we're going to make that like a Google verb, like, let's roll off. Like that's going to be launching an implementation.
There you go. Perfect.
So one of the things we're going to geek out on, whether it's on this call or after, is what we're doing in terms of professional services and implementation and process management. Like we really geek out on it. And we're going to start calling it, onboarding someone will be called rolling them off.
There you go. I'll let James know.
I was going to make the bad joke that it really rolls off your tongue, right?
Kiefer, your sound sucks. Like every 10 calls, you sound like a robot. You might have to log off and log back on again. We'll give that a shot. So, one of the things that Stacy told me, which I think will be simpatico about, is that you were really a pioneer when it came to TikTok.
Kind of. I mean, not in the grand scheme of it, but I think in the like business side of things, I was probably early to adopt in terms of creating a platform focused on like corporate ideas. And so I have over the last couple of years built or found my corner of the internet and people that want to talk about change management and software adoption and sharing stories there. And I found that it's actually a really nice spot to get the real pulse on what's happening in companies versus the things that people are willing to say when their name and company are on full display. And so it's given me a really interesting opportunity to have very candid conversations with people that are living through software implementations, ask very pointed questions, and get the good, the bad, and the ugly back in real time. So it's been a very nice tool for me in that capacity, and helped drive a lot of conversations that I have, whether that's on the speaking side of things that I do regularly or with clients or on LinkedIn as well.
Where is home for you?
I'm in Madison, Wisconsin.
So if I said to you that there's a moratorium on social media platforms that you're allowed to use, and you only get to use one, and you had to drop all the others, which platform would you keep, and which ones would you kill?
I would keep TikTok. The interaction and the dynamic there is so different than other platforms. I've tried building on Instagram. I have my old Instagram that's like my private one that's like for my aunts and uncles to see pictures of my kids. I could part with that. I've tried building a Instagram off of the videos that I've created on TikTok, and without paying to get them seen, it's really, really hard to get traction on the platform.
Yeah.
And I love LinkedIn. It's where I started. If I had to, at this point, TikTok has really become my primary platform.
Wow.
Which handle or which account do you produce all your content under?
So you can search Emma Roloff and it will come up, but the actual handle is Transformation Princess. There's a story there that I don't love to share that handle, but that is what my actual username is.
I feel like you got to share it though.
So my full name is Emma Leah. I am the product of some hippies originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so my husband and I, there was a joke that he would call me Princess, and my maiden name was Heimrl. And so when we first started dating, he put an autocorrect in his phone so that if he typed EMA, it would autocorrect to Princess Emma Leah von Heimrl. And it was this big thing that was in his phone. It was whatever, it was fine. And then when we got married and I switched on to his cell phone plan, the iCloud backup of his autocorrects came to my phone. And I was on a business trip and trying to send someone a message, and I had gotten pretty used to deleting back to Emma. You usually don't write your own name in your phone all that often, so right. I kind of would complain about it here or there, but it wasn't a big push point. And while I was rushing in the airport, I deleted back to the EMA, but I accidentally left the Princess. And I sent a colleague a message saying hey, this is Princess Emma, my flight is delayed. And I didn't even realize I did it until I got the message back that said, hey, Princess, no worries. And I had a number of my coworkers with me that then proceeded to hear my very angry phone call back to my husband telling him to figure out how to fix it and fix it now. But the damage had been done. And so Princess then became the nickname. And I decided to embrace it while I was creating that TikTok handle.
Amazing. Similar but completely different. I have the same thing with duck. And every time, like it would keep writing duck, and that's not what I wanted to say. And like I actually had to go in and program it every single time to make sure that, I write duck. I don't want it and
or ducking. Like
Yeah,
how
ducking,
who's
right.
using ducking in a
So-
regular? Yeah.
Right.
So if you go into my autocorrect, I happen to like to cook, and one of the dishes that my son likes is duck. But now every time I write duck to my wife, it ends up being something else because I had to make a decision which one I use more, and duck and ducking lost. How many TikTok followers do you have?
I think 22,000. I'm not sure off the top
Okay,
of my
so
head.
you're ahead of Ryan Hanley. That's all that matters.
I'll have to send him a message just to let him know. I was informed.
Ryan, you suck. Emma's beating you. It's funny. So I spend a lot of time on TikTok, and you shared an embarrassing story. So if you ask me, I could go look up how many hours a day I spend on TikTok. I don't like to share it, but it's an embarrassing amount of time. But I learn a ton, and it's to the detriment of my team because I'm up all night sending links to people. Here's an AI automation. Here's a great speech. And to me, I learn a ton, and I think the amount that I've learned about AI is purely from TikTok. It's an amazing tool.
No, I agree. And I think that's what's so interesting about the platform. It's like anything, it's an algorithm. So it shows you what you tell it you are interested in and what you want to engage with. So it can be completely mindless, where you are just doom scrolling with no purpose and watching funny memes. Or it can be used as this platform, in my case, where it's kind of blended between purely entertainment and learning. And when you get those micro doses of learning, to me, I think that's a really powerful way to like consume information, because if I sit down with a business book, I will fall asleep before I get too far into it. Or even if I'm listening to the audiobook, I catch myself
Drifting.
drifting. Yeah. Whereas if I get these little micro doses of learning and I want to go in and dive deeper and get more information, the option is there, or that little piece of information can live in my brain. And so I think that there's drawbacks and benefits to every platform, but I think the way that the algorithm can get to know both what you're looking for from an entertainment perspective as well as what you're looking to learn from is really cool. And that's where I think I found most of my followers, is people that want little bits and drips of transformation and change management.
Is the info on transformation and change management, it sounds like it's kind of general and not specific to the insurance industry. Do you find your audience is a more general audience, or is it, at the end of the day, maybe the Roloff consulting clients are insurance, but your audience is broader? Can you navigate that for me for a minute?
Yeah, so I would say on both LinkedIn and TikTok, my following spans across industries. Going back again to kind of my initial entry into technology sales, I was working cross-vertically. And so I do think, again, most of my clients are in the insurance industry. A lot of the work that I do is focused there. But I think part of that is because I can talk in these generalities because they work for insurance, but they also work for manufacturing, and they also work for healthcare. And I think sometimes in the insurance industry, we like to think, and I say this often, that we're a very special, delicate snowflake that no one can understand. But realistically, at the end of the day, a process is a process, and you still want someone that understands your industry and understands the challenges that you have. But there is a pretty profound benefit that comes from people that have worked outside of insurance, being able to recognize where those differences lie and where those similarities are. And especially when it comes to implementing technology and dealing with people and redesigning processes, there's a lot to be learned from outside of the insurance industry and the way that we tackle these problems. And so for me, I like to keep things broad so that I can see those different perspectives and see how quick, when I post a video that I'm creating with something from the insurance industry in mind, how quick do I get a comment from someone that says, this is healthcare? Or people that are commenting about technology platforms and processes that I didn't even know existed, that I can go research and realize the connection that comes back to the work that we're doing in the insurance industry. That being said, like, again, LinkedIn, very, very much heavy on the insurance side of things for me, just because of where I was selling and what my focus was for such a long time. And then sneaky on the TikTok side, I will sometimes get opportunities or people that reach out to me on TikTok that found me there that I'm not connected with on LinkedIn that are involved in the insurance industry in some capacity.
Okay, so at the risk of embarrassing myself, how much time do you spend a day scrolling through TikTok?
I have screen limits set for myself because I can spend all
I just bypass them.
Just override them.
I would say between creating and watching, probably 2.5.
Okay, so I think I for sure have you beat, and I don't do any creating on TikTok. So this is a cry for help. I need help. This is.
Well, so it's probably replaced some of what you're doing from TV or Netflix or whatever,
completely. I can't. TikTok ruined Netflix for me. I can't sit through a 60-minute show anymore.
And that is the concern, I would say. And that's part of why I have noticed from scrolling on every platform, and I think even before I got a TikTok, just when COVID hit and I was on the computer all day long, my attention span has shrunk a lot. So that's definitely an issue with the way that we consume and interact with information. But that being said, you're probably not the only person that can't do that. And there's probably people that are worse that have a Netflix show on in the background and are scrolling at the same time. So if you've at least turned off the TV, you're probably helping yourself.
I've turned it off. But I'm so bad to the point where, and it was a great day when somebody pointed out, I'm sure you know this, but TikTok, you could download content when you're on an airplane, and you could download offline content. You could download 200 videos, and so this way, if you're on a plane with no signal, you could still have your TikTok.
I have not learned that, so you do have a problem.
So if you go into your settings, if you go into your user settings, there's a way you could download offline content, and it's the algorithm is not as good.
But you get a dose.
You could have it.
You can also just connect to the internet on your flight too.
It doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. You're at a spot, you're at a party. You could download offline content.
I would say my screen time limits have made it back because I wasn't reading as much. I wasn't doing the other things that I like to consume. And then also just to make sure that when our kids get home from school from 4:30 to 6:30, between in that time where they get off the bus before dinner, it's shut down except for my Kindle app on my phone, even to the point where I can't access my photos and things other than text messages. My phone becomes a phone, right, and then I have my book. And that does help me a lot. I have an almost 9-year-old. She's within a month of her birthday, and she's been telling me she's 9, but she's actually 8. And then a 6-year-old. Got
it. TikTok has awesome toy recommendations.
They do. And our girls do sparingly get to be involved. They see mom and dad creating content all the time, and they want to be a part of it. And so there are some limits on when and where they can be involved, but they actually do like creating a lot too.
I can't wait to start following you. And Adam, I know you're used to this, but I've monopolized a lot of the time. I'd love to, give you a chance to weigh in. But Adam, I'll put you on the spot. I'd love for you to pick the top 3 reasons why Emma got out of the core selling to carrier game.
I could probably have a few guesses on that. The politics of it, I would imagine, is a big part of it, right? Kind of the processes and politics of selling into a big carrier. I had some experience with that in my life that turned me off from that. And just like the length of like decision making, right? Like being in meetings where you're talking about the next meeting so that you can plan the third meeting, right? Like that really wore me out in terms of like just how slow. I was at a startup before this, and I mean, I remember them thinking like, we'll come back to you in 2 quarters, and I was like, I don't know if we'll be here in 2 quarters, right? Like we're working on weeks, and we've got to generate revenue now, and so just the pace of change, I would imagine, would be frustrating. And then just, I mean, it's all kind of related, but just like the amount of cooks in the kitchen in meetings that we were in, right? You had PwC there in the meeting, you'd have, one of the big core companies there in the meeting, you'd have every single underwriter from every single department, and like by the time they were done that meeting, like they had completely destroyed the product and the implementation plan, and like none of it made any sense, and nobody wanted to do it. And so I know some of those overlapped, but that was why I kind of got out of that game and turned me off from that. So I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
So less the first two for me, because I had been doing like enterprise sales for a while. So that long tail, complex, many people involved sale wasn't foreign to me. I'd been doing that for close to a decade before I took that role. More the last piece, the part that was really hard for me was when I was in my first role. Again, we were an implementer that had multiple tools at our disposal. So from like taking the role of a problem solver going in, I could work with my consultants to figure out what the problem was and how we could adjust the process, and then go back to the toolkit to pull the right tools out. When I moved into working directly for the software company in a new sales role, like net new sales role, my job was only to identify and get the first contract signed. And from there was, and this is the case in a lot of really big software companies, there is then an account manager who takes over and manages the relationship long term. And you kind of like wave them off into the sunset. And then to the point that you made, there's oftentimes an implementation partner who has different incentives and the incentive to stay as long as possible,
right.
and make that implementation happen. And so for me, the part that was really hard was this like, well, no, like the whole reason I'm in this role and what I want to do is to actually implement change in companies and like drive them forward. And if all I'm there to do is get the first contract signed, I don't have any control over the success of what that implementation looks like. And I'm also handing off the project to people that I don't have the same type of trust in that I hope my customer has in me. And so that transition of everything flying out of my hands was like, it sounds a little control freaky, but it was more, I couldn't actually feel confident that the promises that I was making during the sales cycle were going to come to fruition during implementation.
Yeah.
And the amount of horror stories that we could spend the rest of the time talking about who's gone 7 years and still hasn't implemented a product, who's spent 4 times the budget that they initially planned on. And all of that, I think, I can say this now because I work for myself, comes back down to that like weird pass off and handoff of who's responsible and who made the promises and who's trying to follow through with them. There's always somebody else to point the finger at when you have this tangled mess that nobody's actually taking responsibility on making the project successful. And that was a really hard thing for me to really move through. And I had a couple of conversations specifically in that like handoff to management consulting before a deal was even like fully in the works, where I'd be like, okay, so like, how are you guys gonna, what's the scope look like surrounding the consulting and change management on this? And they'd be like, well, how many integrations are there? And I'd be like, well, great, I told you that. And like, I've already set the expectation that there might be some additional work that needs to happen to integrate. What are you gonna do to help the people through this? And they'd be like, well, we really can't do anything more without understanding the technical aspects. And it always came back to the things to me that ultimately don't make the biggest difference.
Right.
And so that was really my biggest, this just doesn't like jive with what I think actually needs to happen for meaningful change to happen. So it didn't feel right.
Yeah. No, I remember I was involved with a project and they were implementing we won't get into all the horror stories because there's a million of them, but like these guys were implementing a major core system overhaul, right? Like, so it was not a small project by any stretch, but like by the time they were implementing it, they were 2 versions behind what the company was selling on that one. So like they're implementing version 8, and they're like, well, they're talking about, like, hey, can we do this? Like, well, version 10 does this. And I was like, wait, you don't have version 10. You're still implementing version 8 because you never finished it, right? Like, it's just, I mean, it's a crazy process.
I mean, and that is definitely a challenge of implementing software in general. At this point, I've had times where we've had to do upgrades of systems before like the initial implementation even goes live. But then we get into also like the interesting dynamics of like what companies are going to just do the upgrade for you for free because they recognize that's like a part of doing business, versus like, are you now all of a sudden going to a cloud native platform and you're going to have to pay X amount to get to like whatever the newest version is? And those are all of the challenges that I ran into. And I don't want to say that like there's anybody that's got it perfect. There's always bumps. There's always challenges. There's always things that are potentially waiting to make a project go awry. But seeing it play out to that point where there was just this like, the finger pointing that can happen, and watching things like clients deciding that they're going to switch implementation partners halfway through because they're not happy with how X, Y, and Z is going on. There was just a lot of like cover your ass happening that added bloat and kept people from being effective. And I think that's the hardest part when it comes to large scale transformations, that I was like, well, you know what? I'll go tell people what I think we should be doing and talk through strategies to get us there, and hope that people that are now doing the work will listen and do what they can to adjust their path.
What do you think? I mean, on that point, and not looking backwards, more looking forward, it feels like the pace of change in technology has really sped up over the last year, right? With AI and mainly AI, but a lot of other things kind of happening where it's like, things we were talking about. Now, Michael can speak to this, but we were talking about things 2 months ago that we're no longer talking about because there's new enhancements of AI that make the original conversation irrelevant, right? I mean, so even at a smaller, look at a regular size PNC agency, whatever that means, like how can you help them? How can we help them implement technology that's moving so fast without, completely overwhelming them or keeping them up to pace?
I think the biggest thing that you have to do, because of how quick everything is moving, is focus on problems and stop shiny object hunting. So when you are looking at an agency and they say, we've got this really big problem and we need to solve this, you have to dive into that problem and then look at what tools and capabilities are available for you to get that problem solved. And even if, so again, with a big core system, if you're implementing something that's 3 versions back, you're in trouble. But if you are implementing something that's 3 months old and it's solving a problem for you, you don't need to be on the thing that's being released this week.
Right.
And so I think part of the psychology of technology and the change and like everything that's going on right now is that a lot of companies use that sense of urgency and that sense of being behind as their selling trigger to get people to act. And the most important thing is that you're taking action towards solving problems, not that you're implementing the absolute newest cutting edge. And especially in an industry like insurance, dabbling with things like AI, from a risk perspective, it might not hurt you to be on the thing that came out 6 months ago or a year ago, as opposed to the thing that's like brand new and, breaking the internet today. So I think the biggest thing that companies need to get back to is thinking through what problem are you trying to solve, not is it the fancy newest tool that we could bring in.
So I want to ask you a question on that. And, it's something that we're constantly rethinking our processes and how we interact with prospects. And one of the things we started documenting is, for independent agents, is like a survey, and question number 1 is like, what are your current problems? And we have this like ever-growing list of agency problems. Now, a separate conversation is, do we want to prime them, or do we want to kind of cheat a little bit and give them a list, or do I want them to come up with it organically? Because if they see the menu, and they're hungry in the restaurant, they'll order anything, as opposed to, tell me what you're in the mood for. and we'll cook it for you. But to think about like a business author like a Jim Collins, right? And he wrote this awesome book years ago called Good to Great. And what he did was I'm going to butcher exactly what he did, but he took all the companies that have been in existence for over 20 years that have outperformed the Dow and looked at what they have in common. Like, what are the traits and the characteristics? So kind of taking that approach to it and thinking about, of all the agencies that you've worked with, what are the most common problems that you see? If I were to say, like, okay, we're going into a new agency, Emma, I want you to predict what the problems are going to be before they even tell me. Obviously, you can't know with certainty, but what's your top 3 or top 5 list of the problems that you just see that are, I'll say, ubiquitous or as common as possible?
The most common that I have heard from a lot of agency owners is that the amount of effort that goes into servicing policies is kind of what's sinking them right now. And especially with things like less than ideal renewals and, having to have such a human touch attached to, if a renewal is going to renew at the same rate, like you have a conversation, it's a quick conversation, the customer is relatively happy. Maybe there's a couple of things that you need to address and you move on, versus like something that's going to rock their world, having to deal with the emotional fallout of that, maybe helping get them multiple quotes, like all of those types of dynamics and the clunkiness that's associated with servicing policies seems to be the number one thing that I'm hearing. And then whether it's, servicing those policies or just generally interacting with technology, I think there is overarchingly a large majority of agencies that feel like all of their processes have been dictated exactly by how it can be done within their software, as opposed to the best way that they think it should be done or the way that differentiates them. So I think that goes into why it's difficult to service a policy and why it's difficult to accomplish all of the things that need to happen to keep your customers happy. But that would be probably the second thing. And then, there's the obvious of the state of the market right now is a challenge for all of them as well.
But that's something that, there are certain things that you just can't do anything about,
No.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
But within the realm of things that are within their decision making, if I, go left or go right, will have a butterfly effect impact on my business, obviously with what's in their control.
Yeah. And I think the other piece that is hitting agencies a little bit harder is the idea of like the aging workforce, but also maybe having a couple of people that are so integral to your business that, like, if Susan went off and got hit by a bus, like, I hope Susan doesn't die, but like, what would happen to your business if Susan wasn't there anymore? I think that there's a lot of risk in agencies where there's a Susan or a couple of Susans that have tons of intellectual knowledge that are institutional knowledge, that is needed to keep the business running smoothly. And what do you do to take that institutional knowledge, pass it on? How do you maybe build better business processes so that you're not fighting with the technology where someone needs to know all of the workarounds? But I think all of them are really tied together in terms of just this idea of like what that progression to the future looks like and how we use technology within the agency space.
Where are you seeing success in replicating Susan? Because we have we had a conversation this morning, Michael, about replicating certain employees that we have, right? Like, how are you seeing agencies who are successful in that? Like, how are they passing that knowledge around? Like, how are they, what are they doing?
I think part of it comes with not allowing technology to completely dictate the process, and building like efficient, logical processes that are enabled by technology. and kind of going through with your whole team and not just Susan, but like, what does that process look like? How do we have it documented? How are we training people on it? Whether that's in an agency or anywhere else, like having things documented and having processes that logically make sense for somebody to step into, as opposed to the amount of times that, you know, over my career, we sat down and we talked, and you ask the question of like, okay, so why are you doing it that way? And how often the answer comes, you name the outdated legacy tool that they're using. Well, we do it that way because when we implemented the system, these 3 steps that we do couldn't be managed by the platform. So we do this in Excel, and then we do this over here. And it's all of this illogical stuff that's driven by how the technology was able to enable the business process before. So just even going through the process of like asking the question of why are we doing it this way? Is there a simpler way for us to do it? And then what technology do we need to bring in to allow that logical process to move forward? Then it's not going to be this like weird, like training or knowledge that someone needs to have on your process specifically. You can explain it and it's going to feel logical, and they're going to be able to step into it a little bit easier. That's probably like would be my initial response. But then there's always, you know, we could go down the path of like, how do you use a internal chatbot that's trained on your, you know, all of your information to be able to help onboard new people and ask questions, and have Susan pass on all of that knowledge into that large language model. But I think even just taking a look at the process and thinking through why are we doing it this way can make a really big difference.
So, at the risk of being accused of a shameless self-promotion, but at the end of the day, like, we're in the self-promotion
It's your
business.
podcast.
Right, it's my podcast, and you know, I'm preaching to the preacher over here. I was going to say you're the queen, but I'll say you're the princess of self-promotion.
There we go.
So one of the soapbox issues that we're always talking about, as far as momentum in our platform is concerned, like I believe that if we could provide an agency with 3 fundamental things. One is the ability to map data to any partner, because like you go back to the carrier example, what I found, and one of the hard lessons that I learned, is every new integration, one of the biggest time sucks was data mapping, right? Okay, here's your data headers, here are my data headers, and we've created this data fabric, and we're trying to position ourselves to be like the Zapier or the N8N or the Make.com of the independent insurance agents. So if Roloff Consulting came and said, okay, I've got a workflow and I refer to GWP, but you call it gross written premium, if we map the data and we have that data fabric, that gives us one core component. The second core component is if we become the database source of truth, because as you know, the average agent has 13 text sources and there is no one database source of truth, so reporting and visibility becomes impossible. But the third, and I'm going to share my screen just, you know, so you could have like a little visibility. You know, it's a slide I created for a show, was if you think about like your iPhone, right? On your phone, there's an app called Shortcuts. Most people don't know that this exists. It's built by Apple, and you could have Apple basically say, you know, hey phone, every morning when I wake up, I want you to check the weather. If it's raining, I want you to call my Uber. When I hit this geolocation on the George Washington Bridge, I want you to hit the Starbucks app and order my coffee. And when Uber ends my ride, I want you to SMS Emma and tell her I'm on my way up. And you could orchestrate these bespoke workflows on your iPhone. And we basically took the same approach for the independent agent. We've got our workflows and our blueprint and our best practices of how we want it to be done, but we realize that no 2 agencies are the same. And a very big part of what we offer, and I want you to be aware of, whether we were recording this or not, is to know one of our three foundational like pillars of like which we built our tech is to be able to do just that. To be able to say like whether you're using our tech or a third party's tech or anyone's tech, we have the mechanism, almost like a UI path, right? Or like an automation hero to be able to say, hey, as long as there's an API or some way to connect to a third party, we will allow you to build a workflow that accounts for that. And, it's like, sorry, Emma, you walked right into it. Because like when you told me like what the biggest problem is, and we recognize that, and we're hypersensitive to that.
Well, that means that you're heading in the right direction, at least from my vantage point. And I think you made the good point that a lot of people don't necessarily know that these types of tools are available. And specifically when it comes down to workflow, over the last number of years, I think we oftentimes will like undercut the value that workflows and automation of these tasks that we know take place over and over and over again can bring to it. It's like, okay, well, I know exactly what needs to happen. I can take care of the process. But when you start to automate those pieces, it adds up so that you can actually focus then on like all of the people side and the emotional intelligence component that comes into the industry as well.
One thing I want to also just geek out with you for a second as someone who, when I talk about like BPMN, okay, so without even saying what it is, I see you shaking your head. Yeah, like you're a geek, and it takes one
You're
to know one.
You're supposed to be nice to her, Michael.
I say that in the sincerest form of flattery, but in the terms of business process, and as someone who like really gets deep into like the DNA of an agency, this is something that we're rolling out right now, where if you think about, these are the 6 core process groups, or these are the 6 core functions in an agency, right? You've got finance and accounting, ops, servicing, quoting, sales, management, reporting. Pretty much anything that you could come up with that an agency does can be fit into one of these buckets. And then if you take sales, okay, these are the 6 processes within sales. There's business contact management, pipeline management, ex-state management, win-back management. And then for each one of these are the workflows. And we've basically created an operating system of 165 processes that fit into 35 process groups, within, these, 6 buckets over here. And then each one actually pulls up into, here's the step-by-step guide of how you do it, and here's when you use it. And we actually have these marked up with BPMN. So we could actually say, okay, let's go into an agency and let's do a diagnostic or an assessment or benchmark. What do they do? And we found that, like, even though it seems overwhelming, it's really, agencies like it because it's a roadmap of, and it makes it digestible of, okay, these are the 165 workflows, but these are the 70 that are important to me in my agency, and these are the 10 where I have problems. So I just wanted you to see it so we could geek out later.
You can call me a geek. I've had that happen many times before, and I unintentionally found myself getting more into this stuff than I ever thought I would back when I took that first job. So you're not alone in thinking that about me, so don't worry.
I wasn't worried. Adam was worried.
I'm just worried about Stacy. I just want.
Yeah, no, I'm a little scared of Stacy, if I'm being perfectly honest. So. I want to come back to AI. What percentages of agencies that you've encountered, like, are really taking it seriously or adopting it? If you wanted to break it up into, say, like, of the agencies, the percentage are taking it seriously, paying attention, and just ignoring it. Like, how would you assess the marketplace from an agency perspective?
So I probably don't have a great answer for how many people are ignoring or avoiding it, because those aren't the agencies that I'm interacting with. with, if that makes sense. Like the people that I'm having conversations with or being brought in to.
What's the opposite of adverse selection? Whatever that is, that's
Yeah.
right.
So like my view, I would say like of the people I'm interacting with, everybody is aware of it. They know that it's out there. Now that being said, the varieties of how they think of it coming into their business. I had a conversation with someone the other day who mentioned being at a conference during an agency conference where they watched people's minds be blown that AI could take notes for them on a call. And I have also been in there are still plenty of people that know quote unquote AI exists and they should be potentially using it for their business but have no concept of what that means. So I do know that there is a group of people that are out there, but those are typically not the agencies that I'm interacting with. I would say in terms of like probably 75% of agencies have something in their company like tech platform wise that could have AI enabled, because almost everybody is building it into their platform. Now, whether they know to be asking the questions of how to use it or whether they're comfortable using it is a whole different conversation. And I would say it's probably the top 25% that are thinking of how we can use it, leveraging it in different places in their business, experimenting with it. And I guess it's probably that 80-20 principle, like 80% of people aren't utilizing it the way that they should be. There's 20 to 25% that are actually going after it. And I would say the like pipeline to using AI, or maybe like the first taste is probably tools like you mentioned Zapier, where they've got like all of a sudden this small little taste of where AI could potentially come in and enhance something. Or they have some salesperson that went out and bought Fireflies or Otter, and now everybody on the sales team is super excited about where it can be used here, but it's pockets. I don't think I have met somebody that's truly got like, AI built into every facet of their business of any kind, aside from like Amazon and Tesla and, these big tech startups. Most legacy companies are still trying to figure out where to move beyond these specific use cases to like truly building it into the fabric of the business.
So going back to the question I asked you earlier, where it was like focus on problems, and put that aside. So, I know you do when you get up at a show and you have an audience of 1,000 agents sitting there, and you had to share something that would be meaningful to most. What would that be? Like if you could just, give them a piece of advice that, you've seen. Again, we touched upon, focusing on the problems, but from a practical, tactical approach, what would be the most universal piece of advice you would have?
I think that this is going to maybe fall outside of maybe where your brain is going, but
if you have any idea where my brain is going,
yeah, good luck to you.
You can get a prize.
My number one advice to everybody in the world of AI is to start paying attention to where you add uniquely human value and start leaning into that piece of your business and finding ways to strengthen that and continue to train your employees in those places. So soft skills, critical thinking. I would argue critical thinking is a soft skill, but things like, again, empathy, critical thinking, just even conversation skills, how to, it sounds weird, but how to multitask with technology and the human side of things. Because as we start automating more, when you're interacting with a computer at the same time that you're talking to someone, both sides of your brain are going. That's a skill that requires us to hone. So how do you have those uniquely human pieces while you're interfacing with technology? all of those things are going to become even more important for humans as we figure out what role we play in the future of work. Because there's no question in my mind that everybody's job is going to be different in 5 years than it is today. It's just, how are you going to continue to add value is what's going to shift. And it's going to come down to like, what are the pieces that humans want to be doing? Where do we want to interact with humans? Where do we find fulfillment interacting with other people as opposed to opting towards digital experiences? And I think part of how you get to the point where you recognize what is uniquely human and where your value comes in is through building what I call digital literacy. Sometimes it's called digital dexterity, whatever name you want to apply to it. It's spending the time to learn about technology. So going back to, again, the people that aren't even spending time learning about AI probably aren't the people that are like at the same conferences that I'm going to all the time. But everybody, whether you're a server at a restaurant or you're a oncologist at a hospital or anything in between, technology is changing the way that you're doing your job, and you need to understand where and how it's going to come in and what are the parts that you're going to still want to be doing and what are the parts that are going to add value. But you can't get to that part until you've learned about the technology. So you have to build that foundation of digital literacy so that you can continue to build your human skills.
I find that fascinating. And like when we think about when we onboard a client or even talking to a prospect, we have this assessment and a capability score. And I made a note maybe to try to understand their level of digital literacy is probably something that's worth doing.
That was, I mean, the way you said that was really eloquent. I think that's what a lot of people are trying to get at. You maybe had the best explanation of that I've heard in a long time, whereas, you know, a lot of the work we do is going to be commoditized, right? And so, you know, the value an agent brings isn't printing out certificates, right? And I think we all can recognize that. But, like, you know, we focus on, like, well, we can do that for you. But it's like really what they should be focusing on is on what they can do when we do that for them, right? No, I mean, I don't have
How
a lot
are you
to add.
training your people to be prepared for it? What are they?
100%.
And I think that's, you know, when we look at the fear that's associated with AI, so much of it comes from this idea that like jobs will be replaced. Jobs will change.
Yeah.
And I mean, now 10 years from now, I could be sitting in a Wall-E situation where we all have our like scooters and I'm eating my words for saying this, but like humans have always had disruptive technology that's being created, that's shifting and changing the way that we do things. And we don't stop solving problems. We start going for more complex problems and we start going for different things, and society adapts alongside it. The biggest threat that comes forward when we look at AI goes back to what you were saying about the pace of change and how quick things are happening. So the best thing that you can do as a leader and as an individual is spend time learning so that you can adapt, because you can't adapt if you haven't done that learning. And like filling up skill sets that maybe have been lacking because you've been focused on the mundane processes that we've had to complete. But there's a whole bunch of things and a whole bunch of talent gaps and stuff that we haven't even begun to fill. There's plenty of opportunity and plenty of problems to solve. We just have to build the skill set to be able to bridge us there.
Emma, as you were describing the uniquely human value, I got to find a new quote, but I'm often quoting Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, who said, AI will not replace humans, but humans that leverage AI will replace humans that do not leverage AI. And for today, I believe that to be the case. Tomorrow, we're going to wake up and Manus and DeepSeek will come up with a new model that will prove me wrong. But until then, I as someone on my team says, I violently agree with you. Emma, this was amazing.
It was awesome.
I know it sounds jerky, but you know, there are certain times where I learn more than others, and I learned a lot.
Well, thank you.
And I took a lot of notes. and I'm eager to continue the conversation and figure out ways that we could work together. And I know that our agents could and would benefit from having exposure to you and your experience, and however we could make that happen, I'd like to explore that. And but don't tell Stacy, because then she's going to take all the credit. So, I want to think that's my idea, but this was great.
I made a video about that today, actually, how a really good business skill is being able to convince other people that your ideas were theirs. So maybe that was her plan the entire
I think
time.
that's like maybe the most important skill, right?
It's inception, right?
Exactly.
Awesome.
I do have.
Well,
I have one final question that you mentioned earlier, if I can.
Okay.
So you said that insurance agents, we believe ourselves to be this snowflake complex industry that nobody else understands. Do other industries, in your experience, have the same feeling? It's just us.
Oh, yes. Yes. Everybody, and so I will give you one example if we have time. So when I was selling, again, cross-vertically, I had a customer that was a biotech company that had a experimental treatment. It was FDA approved, so they, like, doctors would order it, whatever. But from time to time, an insurance company would deny the claim for that product. And the biotech company would move through what they called their revenue cycle process, where they would appeal the appeal, essentially, and there would be back and forth between the insurance company and the biotech company until they eventually settled on what they were going to pay. Then on the flip side, I had a health insurance customer who had the other side of that process, which they called the appeals and grievances process. Now, in the marketplace, if you go and you search revenue cycle, there are tons and tons of point solutions for that. And if you go and you search appeals and grievances, there are point solutions for that are companies that are specifically solving those problems. We used the exact same technology to solve both ends of that process, and the process was essentially the same, just the back and forth between the two different tools. But while I was in that sales cycle, if I dared utter the idea of revenue cycle during the appeals and grievances conversation, I would have been kicked out of the room and vice versa. And so for me, a lot of my sales was looking at, like, where do we have experience? Where have we done stuff like this before? And then replacing it with the industry specific vernacular, as opposed to replacing the lesson on the workflow and process side. But I will say that, you know, selling into insurance in a consulting company that was cross-vertical, I often ran into challenges with people being like, but we really want someone that specializes in insurance. Yeah. And I'd be like, well, yeah, but like my consultants all started in insurance. They grew up in that industry. They're just working cross-vertically now. And I'd be like, yeah, but we really need somebody that has a dedicated practice. And I've seen that again in other industries. I, went to a manufacturing conference where they were talking about their talent gap and how slow they are to adopt. And it was almost like you could have dubbed it over with insurance every time they said manufacturing, and it would have felt exactly the same. So we are not the only ones that fall victim to that. It's every industry, but I think that's where the value to poking your head outside of your industry comes from. And sometimes you'll find stuff that helps you solve problems because it's just a different vantage point of what you're trying to accomplish.
So you're unique and special, just like everybody else, right?
Yes, everyone is a snowflake, but the snowflakes all look the same if you zoom out enough.
I love it.
Very poetic. Emma, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. And let's make sure that this becomes a non-theoretical, working relationship.
Sounds great.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Emma.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Insurance Technology Amplified. Be sure to stay connected and up to date by following Momentum AMP on all social networks. For show notes, resources, and details on upcoming episodes, visit our podcast page at momentumamp.com/podcast. We look forward to having you join us next time. Take care and see you soon.